Hello everybody, we just finished watching the 6th episode of the Bleach 1000-year Blood War arc of the anime, and as normal, I would like to talk about it, so talk about it I will. Again, just with the housekeeping stuff before we really get started talking about it, of course this is episode 6 of the 1000-year Blood War arc, and it is titled The Fire, right? Pretty standard title throughout. It really gives that idea of, yes, this is the fire. Overall in Bleach, this is episode 372, right? We're getting up there in the numbers, right? And, yeah, that's really all I have to say. This episode covers about chapters 506 to 510 of the manga. I normally look at the manga before doing these episodes, but this time I literally forgot, and I sort of need to get this recorded and out. So, yeah, I haven't done that, so I'll just be talking about the episode, not any changes that happened between the anime or the manga here, right? And so without further ado, I say we get started and talk about the fire. So this episode really starts off with Uryu looking through this book that he found from Ryukin a few episodes ago, right? Uryu's looking through it, and we sort of see in the book a older picture or a younger picture of Yamamoto in his prime, right? And fittingly enough, we cut to Yamamoto into Soul Society, sort of getting like a flashback image of the two of them, and that's a big theme between this episode is the old Yamamoto and the younger Yamamoto, right? The two of them sort of looking the same, and we can tell that this fight between Yhwach and Yamamoto has happened before, and it really just goes to show this fight and how much it parallels to one that happened 1,000 years ago, right? But we'll get into it. At this point, the title plays, and our opening is, of course, Scar by Tatsuya Kitani, right? Opening's the opening. I think it's finally starting to grow on me more, but yeah, it's really just that. And one more thing to note about this, the title card for this episode is really nice. It's just Bleach 06, right? And then it's just The Fire, right? Just a very standard title, and just it really works to make a good title card, a good title for an episode in general, right? Who knows, I may even title this video just The Fire, maybe The Raging Fire, I don't know, who knows. Pretty much we actually open up the episode proper with Yamamoto being like, hey, Yhwach, I've come to take your life, you will not be living longer after this, right? We didn't cut to Shunsui, who is fighting the Stern Ritter he's facing against, right? His name's Robert Acutrone, and pretty much Shunsui's just like, hey, old man Yamamoto's getting ready to fight. At this point, I know that we can't lose, right? And Robert Acutrone actually makes a interesting remark of, you're not the only one whose boss fighting somebody can give people the upper strength, right? I am feeling good because I know that my boss is going to win. And at this point, we see that Yamamoto is getting jumped by like 4 Stern Ritter, right? And he just completely vaporizes them and everything. And at this point, we see that Yamamoto just is summoning all of this fire from his body. And as these pillars are just rising up, right, we see that pretty much all of our really important characters that we're focusing on here, like Hitsugaya, Toshiro, like all of the people who've gotten their Bankai stolen are pretty much just looking and like, we can't lose, we know what's going on, right? It's these pillars of fire just shooting into the sky. It's a really nice visual that just lends to what this episode is all about. At this point, there's a big attack sequence that goes on between Yhwach and Yamamoto. They just fight it out, right? Not a whole lot to say, right? And during all of this, we see that there's just this more of a flashback parallel between the two of them, right? Yamamoto's just getting absolutely, like, he's just winning in every single way, right? And Yhwach is just getting destroyed. And we're getting more parallels of how this happened in the past and how it's happening now, right? And as they just keep fighting back and forth, right, eventually Yamamoto is just like, all right, this is it. As he just summons all of the fire that was running around, and all of the fire just disappears, right? And then we cut to a bunch of Soul Reapers around the Soul Society who are, their lips are getting cracked, right? And there's this flower in the Squad 4 barracks, and it's just evaporating, right? And we then learn what Yamamoto's thing is, right? Like, all right, everything is getting evaporated. Like the guy who stole Hyorimaru from Hitsugaya can no longer use the Bankai power, and we learned that pretty much a mass evaporation is happening all over the Soul Society, right? At this point, almost everybody realizes what's going on, especially Yhwach, as Yamamoto proclaims Bankai, Zanka no Tachi, right? And at this point, just like the entire tip of the scale just like changes, right? Yamamoto just comes up and starts to fight Yhwach, and Yhwach's like, this Bankai has also changed. Whenever we fought so many years ago, it wasn't like this. Why is the sword just not bursting into flames like it was back then? And it's at this point that Yamamoto slams the tip of the blade on the ground, and everything on the ground just instantly vaporizes, right? And that's when Yamamoto proclaims Zanka no Tachi East, Hyoku Suji Sujin. As we understand, as Yamamoto explains it, that the tip of his blade is where all of the firepower is, right? And it's just completely overtaking everything else. He's got no other power besides for the tip of this blade, right? And it just completely blows Yhwach away, right? And at this point, they're making remarks to each other, and this is when Yamamoto decides to use his next power, Zanka no Tachi West, Zanjitsu Goku. And we learn that pretty much this part of his Bankai creates flames that burn 15 million degrees Celsius, right? And we see that they've enveloped Yamamoto as he's just walking around, and he's like melting the ground, right? And pretty much what ends up happening is he's just burning everything to ashes, and he's just like, if we don't get done with this fast, the Soul Society and everything will be gone with it, right? At this point, we cut back over to Uryu, who is, of course, looking through this book that he found earlier, right? And as he's reading through it, he sort of gets a realization of, oh, wait, so there was this first blood war 1,000 years ago, and then 200 years ago, there was the Quincy Extermination Act, right? And he's looking through all of this, and he sort of draws the parallels himself between this picture of Yamamoto coated in flame with this current Yamamoto who's also covered in flame, right? Again, it's that duality that we just keep on seeing throughout this entire episode. And eventually, we cut back over to the fight, and Yhwach is covered himself in blood, right? This, is, of course, is one of the Quincy's defensive power, right? And he's like, I would have been totally dead if it wasn't for this blood that's covering me, right? As he just starts to attack, the two of them just go at it, right? More flashbacks occur, right? And eventually, Yhwach draws his sword, and it just gets cut in half instantly, right? And at this point, he decides to start using arrows, being that whenever McQuincy's like peripheral weapons are gone, the only thing they have to use is arrows, right? Just more fighting going on, right? Until Yhwach proclaims that he is going to use a move, right? And he uses, I'm going to butcher this. I don't even know if I wrote it down right. Kirchenlies Santwagler, right? Pretty much that is one of the biggest Quincy defensive spells, right? And the way that the way Yhwach says it is, if you step in here, you will be burned by God's light itself, right? So, of course, very big destructive power. And at this point, Yamamoto is just done pulling out all of the stops. He uses Zanka no Tachi South. And before I say the name of this attack, let me say, this thing is massive. Like, the subtitle for this thing, oh my gosh, right? But it's Kakuju Ma no Kushi Dai Sujin, right? So Kakuju Ma no Kuji Dai Shujin, right? Pretty much it is this attack that raises every single one of the people that Yamamoto has ever slaughtered, right? Any person that has been burned to ashes by his blade gets resurrected in this one swift movement of his Bankai, right? And pretty much there's a bunch of these dead enemies like rising up from the ground, right? Hundreds of them, thousands of them, all just getting ready to swarm Yamamoto, or not Yamamoto, Yhwach, right? And at this point, I want to make a note that all of these like zombie skeleton things are all in CGI, right? Every single one of them. There's not one that's not in it. They are all in CGI, which take it or leave it, but hey, that's how it is. It doesn't look terrible, but it definitely takes you out of the experience of it, right? And pretty much we learned that pretty much in Yhwach's mind, these zombie clones that too many U names Yamamoto summoned are looking like old Quincy that got slaughtered in the war 100 years ago by Yamamoto, and they're looking like that to Yhwach, right? And at this point, Yamamoto makes a few comments about how they have not been able to yet steal his Bankai, right? And there's also a few notes mentioned about how Yamamoto's using these dirty tactics that the Quincy would likely use, right? And as Yamamoto's standing here just getting enveloped by all these zombies, we keep doing massive flashbacks between the younger Yamamoto and the current Yamamoto, just showing that this event really did happen all that time ago, right? And here at the end, Yhwach breaks free of all of these reins, and as he's starting to walk, Yamamoto uses his final move, Zanka no Tachi North, Tenchi Kagen. As we don't even get an explanation for this one, right? But it's just this massive brute of firepower that just comes through, and we see that that Yhwach has been severed in half by this power, right? And at this point, we see the Bankai Zanka no Tachi deactivate as rain starts to fall over all of the Soul Society, right? At this point, we get our episode break. This is happening like 17 minutes into the episode, right? It's a very late break, but sort of needed because there's not really any moment you can cut between all of that, right? And at this point, we see that Yhwach is laying on the ground, right? And he's like, "Oh, dear Majesty, please forgive me for what I have done," right? And at this point, Yamamoto's just like, "What are you doing? What are you talking about? Do you have another master? You are your master. You are Yhwach, right?" As we see the Squad 1 barracks just engulf in a flame, a blue Quincy flame, as Yamamoto is just standing here, right? And at this point, the real Yhwach appears, and he thanks the Yhwach who has been standing in, and we learned this is Sternritter Y, the yourself, Lloyd Royd, right? And we understand that this Yhwach who's here now is the real one, right? And at this point, he just honors, he's just like, "Thank you. You stalled for so long. You are a true Quincy," right? As this real Yhwach kills Lloyd on the ground here, and Yhwach's just like, or not Yhwach, Yamamoto's just like, "What were you doing this entire time? If you weren't fighting me, what was going on?" Right? And we learned that Yhwach was in the Special Central Guard prison under the Squad 1 barracks, talking with Sosuke Aizen, right? And we didn't see Aizen's design for this arc. It's very interesting. He's got like an eye patch over one eye, and he's just chained to a wall, sort of like that one scene in Evangelion where Lilith is on the wall, right? And we pretty much get a conversation between Yhwach and Aizen, and Yhwach's just like, "Hey, join me, you can help me out, you're a special threat." Aizen's like, "Hey, I refuse, and it would take too long to kill me anyway for you, so I've got the Hokyoku on my side, so what does all this mean?" Right, and at this point, we cut back up where Yamamoto's just enraged, right, as he proclaims, Bankai Zakanotachi one more time, and at this point, Yhwach just takes out his medallion and steals Yamamoto's Bankai, right? And at this point, we get an explanation of why his Bankai couldn't be stolen before. It's because the only one that could handle it is Yhwach himself. And as this revelation comes through, we see that Yhwach summons his real sword made out of the Quincy Blue Reishi, right? As we cut to this white screen, as we just have the words flash on the screen, farewell, Yamamoto, right? As there's just this blood splatter as we cut to Yamamoto, who has just been cut right in half, as Yhwach was done before by Yamamoto. And that is the end of the episode. Just wrapping things up, our ending is, of course, Salahate by Serian, right? And we learned that the next episode, episode 7, will be titled Born in the Dark, right? Now, as far as my opinions on this episode go, they are very varied. I really love the idea of Zakanotachi, right? A Bankai with a north, south, east, and west powers to it, right? And each one does a different thing, right? The whole thing of the Zakanotachi South is very intriguing, being that, of course, well, it raises the dead, and despite what you may think of the CGI that was played in this episode, it worked really well in general, and it was just very good overall, right? The whole thing with the Lloyd Royd situation and him standing in for Yhwach is pretty stupid. I'm gonna admit it. I mean, it's really dumb. It's a good way to kill off Yamamoto, as we see done at the end of the episode, right? It serves its purpose. It's really fine. I don't really have too much of a formed opinion on it. And, I mean, I really don't have a whole lot to say about this. It's a really good episode. I really think the motif of the episode title just being The Fire is perfect. I mean, I don't think there's anything different you could call this episode besides The Fire. It really goes to show what this episode is meaning to be and what it really succeeds at it, right? The whole thing of, like, everybody in the Soul Society being like, we've won now since Yamamoto uses Bankai. I mean, you'd probably do the same if you were in a war. Your main system just brought out their biggest power, but hey, it's whatever it is. And, yeah, that was The Fire with Zakanotachi. Cool Bankai name. It's just, I mean, I can't even understand why the South has such a long name. Kakuji Mono Kushi Dai Sujin, right? It's just so long. But hey, that's really all I have to say. And with this, of course, this was Bleach episode 6, 372 overall, titled The Fire. And we will be back next time with Bleach 1000-Year Blood War episode 7, titled none other than Born in the Dark. Alright, this will be Glowplasma231 out. Hello, everybody.